To many of us, it means nothing. A building entangled by highways and condos. But to some of us, Boston Sand and Gravel is a landmark. One of the most Bostonian the city has to offer. Because of its help, we have the Hancock Tower, the Zakim Bridge, and the Seaport District. Come along as we follow Boston Sand and Gravel's success all the way up from the source to learn the full story of one of the most valuable industries in Boston. Boston, Massachusetts. You may not be able to tell by its skyscrapers and busy streets, but Boston's Back Bay neighborhood wasn't always a bustling hub. A tidal marsh up until the 1800s, the Back Bay was filled in with gravel sourced from the metro area, ultimately creating the neighborhood we know today. This project sparked massive construction, creating the High Spine, a large area where skyscraper construction is permissible in the city. This, alongside interstate construction, bolstered Boston's growth. But Boston's biggest and most famous construction project was yet to come. The most complex urban construction project in U.S. history, also known as the Big Dig, would take place from 1991 to 2007. The project involved moving multiple highways underneath the blocks of the city. 3.8 million cubic yards of concrete were produced for the project, enough to build a standard sidewalk from Boston to San Francisco and back 3 times, according to MassGov. The crowning achievement of the Big Dig is undoubtedly the Zakim Bridge. But its giant concrete monoliths conceal something much more important to Boston history than you may think. It is below this bridge where you will find the industry that made much of this construction possible: Boston Sand and Gravel. But why, in a city of constant redevelopment, is Boston Sand and Gravel still here? The answer lies much further from the city than you may think. As we celebrate the landmark of 10,000 subscribers, join Boston by Rails as we uncover the history of the most important train Boston has never heard of, and the industry that refuses to die. Boston Sand and Gravel Company is a relic of an age when Boston was covered with industrial sites, but now it is one of the only ones remaining. The humble industrial facade of Boston Sand and Gravel is an often overlooked historical monument. Everybody knows Fenway Park, the Bunker Hill Monument, and Old North Church. Boston Sand and Gravel is yet another landmark in the city that has hardly changed. It marks the point where you break free from traffic on the ever-congested Storrow Drive, perhaps heading home or on a vacation north of town. Just as the south side of the city has the Rainbow Swash, the north side has Boston Sand and Gravel. These iconic structures are like signs saying, "Welcome home." It's logical to think that something else should go in this industry's prime location. But there is not much logic in moving one of Boston's largest concrete suppliers further from the city. Boston Sand and Gravel has played a central role in the city's growth. In this documentary, We will delve into the history of the Boston Sand and Gravel Company, the subsidiaries that provide it with materials, the trains that bring ingredients into town, and the day-to-day operations you may witness while driving by the industry. Let's get started. The Boston Sand and Gravel Company was founded in 1914, first at the current location of the Cambridge Side Galleria. Unlike today, the company receives sand and gravel, necessary materials for making concrete, by dredging the ocean floor. Steam-powered barges filled with the aggregates would travel up and down the Charles River and into the Lechmere Canal to reach the industry. Today, the hustle-bustle industry stands between the interchange of Interstate 93, Route 1, Starrow Drive, and the 7 tracks that lead into the MBTA's North Station. Materials like sand and cement are now delivered by rail from points north. Gravel and other aggregates are trucked into the industry. This map overlay, provided by Boston Public Library's Atlas Scope, gives a good sense of how much industry there once was in Cambridge and Boston's core. All of those train tracks you see on the left are now gone, replaced with developments. Hence why it is so remarkable that Boston Sand and Gravel still stands today. But how did it get to its current location? Let's find out by talking to Alan McMillan, a retired Boston and Maine railroad engineer.
That was originally a coach yard for passenger service. There would be around 400 coaches stored there every day. There were makeup coaches for all the trains that ran out of there. And Patrick McGinnis was president of the Boston and Maine in the 50s and 60s. Sold it to the guy who owned Boston Sand and Gravel, but it was originally the Boston Maine Railroad coach yard, that entire property there. You look at pictures from long ago and you can see hundreds of passenger cars stored over there.
One of the keys to Boston Sand and Gravel's long-term success is the company's craft. If Boston Sand and Gravel weren't producing concrete, the very foundation of highway and development projects, it likely would not still be where it stands today. After all, the majority of the industries that once stood in this area are gone. Today, Boston Sand and Gravel is the only rail-served industry left in Boston's inner core. But just how important is concrete to our city? If you really think about it, concrete makes up much of what we know and love in Boston. It can be made as large as the foundation to an entire building, or as small as one of these concrete blocks. However, no matter how small concrete is made, it's always heavy. Ugh. Man. Oh. I'm just kidding. This is made of foam, but what's not made of foam is our city. Having a source for high-quality concrete located in a city's core is a major asset, especially in a city like Boston, with a delicate mix of maintaining old and designing new buildings. Concrete is always in high demand, but how is it made? Greetings, Boston by fans, and welcome to the Boston by Lab. Today, we will be making concrete. In the most simple sense, concrete is made by mixing sand, gravel, cement, and water. Sand and gravel are two of the most valuable natural deposits in the United States, and cement is readily produced globally. Without these materials, high-quality concrete production is not possible. But Boston Sand and Gravel's plant is located in the city, and there are no substantial sand or gravel pits nearby. So where do these crucial ingredients come from? To find the answer to this question, we must travel 100 miles north. Though it is called the Granite State, New Hampshire is also well known in the construction industry for its glacial deposits of sand and gravel. When the Wisconsin glacial period came to an end 11,000 years ago, the retracting glaciers left behind pits of high-quality, well-drained sand and gravel. Such plentiful amounts of aggregate have led to dozens of sand and gravel mining operations in New Hampshire. Boston Sand and Gravel has a handful of subsidiaries, much of which aid their concrete production and distribution efforts. These wholly owned subsidiaries allow for the company to have a broader reach over the New England region. Like Manchester Sand and Gravel in Hooksett, New Hampshire. This industry is responsible for gathering and distributing gravel to the local area and Boston Sand and Gravel's Charlestown site. Trucks ship gravel from this subsidiary right down I-93. The other major natural ingredients for producing concrete are sand and water. I'll be honest, I'm not totally sure where the water comes from. I would think it could be tap or well water. But the sand provides us with a very interesting story. Ossipee, New Hampshire, a town of only 4,500, is no stranger to sand mining. Blessed with a seemingly never-ending supply of high-quality sand, Ossipee's Pine River-Esker sand deposits have been utilized by Boston Sand and Gravel for over half a century. When visiting this area, one might not think that the sand under their feet is the same sand that was used in the concrete in many of Boston's sidewalks. Ossipee Aggregate's main site consists of over 2,400 acres of land, just off busy New Hampshire Highway Route 16. The site has a quarry, sand and gravel pits, as well as an aggregate production facility. Producing around 1 million tons of sand and stone products a year, Ossipee Aggregates feeds Boston Sand and Gravel's thirst for sand to make its concrete. Trucks ship materials locally within 50 miles of the headquarters, while longer shipments, like to Boston Sand and Gravel, are handled by the New Hampshire North Coast Railroad. This morning, I have been busy chasing NHN D7 from Dover, New Hampshire all the way up to Ossipee. Here's a quick rundown on how the NHN operation works. It's best thought of as a cycle. Starting on Monday afternoon, a crew using the symbol D8 takes sand loads from Ossipee Aggregates, or the pit, to Dover Yard on CSX territory. Later that same night, a CSX crew using the symbol L065 takes the loaded sand cars into the city. Majority of the time, they follow the route of Amtrak's Downeaster into Boston. Every now and then, they will take the Haverhill line via Reading instead. Once they arrive in the city, they spot the loads and take out the previous trip's empties back to Dover, using the same symbol. After arriving in Dover in the early morning, the consist sits until an NHN crew using the symbol D7 takes the empties back to Ossipee. When they get to Ossipee, they drop the empties in the pit for them to get loaded and taken into Boston by D8 later in the day. This operation happens Monday to Thursday, but lately has only been operating into the city on Monday and Wednesday nights. I am here at the pit on the sunny day of August 13th, 2024. I have just spent the morning chasing D7 from Dover Yard. Looking east, we see a large grade, the final stretch of track leading up to the pit. The road to the right is used by NHN employees to access their locomotive shops and servicing area. D7 will now drop off these empties for loading and grab a cut of loads for Rochester's sand and gravel. We'll get to what that is later. Right now, D8 is spotting the Rochester loads, which it will soon take out of the pit and down to a siding near the locomotive shop. With the train crew taking a lunch break at the engine shop, I decided to get some food for myself. Ossipee House of Pizza came through. Their mini 9-inch cheese pizza was just $9, and boy was it good. After that pizza, I needed to cool off. With the temperature being a scorching 90 degrees, I thought it'd be nice to take a dip at one of Ossipee's lakes. On my way to Lake Duncan, I missed the turn and found myself at yet another sand pit. There are numerous other sand and gravel companies in town, whose products are locally shipped. I quickly turned around and found the lake. It was a nice reset. Back at the pit, D8 has just arrived. Right now, they are grabbing their loads for Boston and waiting for the final cars to be filled with sand. In the meantime, the crew must grab their paperwork from the office and have a job briefing before jetting off towards Dover. The locomotives will also be refueled on the fueling track. Sand mining in this location began in the 1960s, yet the loading process for train cars remains simple. Ossipee Aggregates uses a front loader. And now begins the fun part, following this train all the way into Boston. Browns Ridge Road is the first crossing east of Route 16 on the Conway branch. At this moment, D8 is grabbing those 9 cars we saw them take out of the pit this morning. They will be headed to a point known as Tri-City, where they will serve Rochester's sand and gravel. If you listen carefully, you can hear the engines roaring up the hill in the distance. These New Hampshire grades are the real deal. This train is traveling on the former Boston and Maine Railroad Conway branch. Looking back at the engine shop, notice how a line appears to continue northbound. That is the Conway branch right-of-way, which travels all the way up to Conway, New Hampshire. The portion between Conway and Ossipee is abandoned. Not much remains of the right-of-way either. It's places like the old station in downtown Ossipee that remind us of this line's past dominance. Sand from this very pit has been shipped into Boston for generations. Before the New Hampshire North Coast, the Boston and Maine was responsible for transporting this sand into the city. When the Boston and Maine went belly up in 1983, they made an attempt to abandon the Conway branch. In 1986, Boston Sand and Gravel would purchase the line from the Boston and Maine up until Ossipee, upgrading it to Class 3 railroad standards, and ultimately saving it from abandonment. With an estimated 30 years of supply left in the pit, NHN shouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. Each time NHN runs a train into Boston, which usually carries about 10 to 20 carloads, an estimated 30 to 50 trucks are taken off the road. NHN's locomotive fleet is bigger than these two GP38-2s. 3825, the sister of the 3823, is a GP38-2 frequently used on road service. NHN also has two of their very own high-hood GP18 locomotives. 1801, formerly Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad 1341, was acquired by NHN from the New England Central Railroad. 1802, whom NHN bought from the 470 Railroad Club, who bought it from the MBTA, was formerly Grand Trunk Railroad 4952. 4952 would then spend some years on the SEMTA, Detroit's short-lived commuter rail, before being purchased by the MBTA and turned into number 904. Here is D8 making its first and only stop of today's trip. Located at Tri-City is Eastern Propane and the Rochester Sand and Gravel site, another subsidiary. The rest of the cars on this consist are for Boston. This isn't always the case, though. NHN serves multiple non-aggregate industries, including Eastern Propane, as I mentioned, and one unnamed industry in Rollinsford. For today's D8, it's a straight shot to Dover after their work at Tri-City. I intercepted them next at Dover Yard, their final stop of the day. This is now CSX trackage, and once D8 arrives, it will tie down until a CSX crew can take it into Boston. This was really the first moment in the trip where I had time to take a look at my car. Would you be surprised to see that it was covered in sand? Not me. The crew for tonight's L065 is on duty at 7 p.m. The final leg of the trip into Boston can be difficult for this train. L065 usually has to wait for MBTA and Amtrak moves as it gets close to the city. This evening, the dispatcher has L065 following Amtrak 688 into Massachusetts and an MBTA inbound into Boston. We are stationed just south of the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border in Bradford. Things get especially hard for L065 around Vale interlocking, where two tracks become one for 1.5 miles. Depending on what time they leave Dover, it can be difficult for them to get through this area without waiting for commuter traffic. At Vale interlocking is also what's known as a defect detector. The defect detector device tells L065 that they are not dragging any equipment, which is a major hazard common in freight railroading when you have such a long train. Keep an ear out for the defect detector going over the radio. The defect detector and scanner audio you are about to hear is from a day in June.
META detector, milepost 22.3. Track 1, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 108 out.
Just 3825 west, stand over one track, no defects up. CSX L065 engine, NHN 3825, Jill is Boston West, radio checkup.
Boston West Airport L065, good radio, over.
Good radio, thank you. Sign off.
With all this talk about sand, you may be wondering, Nathan, where does the cement come from? That final, crucial product for making concrete. Well, don't worry. The source of the cement is about to pass through Ballardvale, right behind L065.
22.3. Track 1, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 28. Rebroadcast. Out.
That was CSX L055, the last freight train that runs into Boston's North Terminal alongside the sand train. On tonight's L055 were two hoppers, filled to the brim with cement for the Cement Quebec plant in Everett. I can only assume that once these loaded hoppers are dropped off at Cement Quebec, some of it is trucked over to the Boston Sand and Gravel site in Charlestown and used for their concrete production. Boston Sand and Gravel lists Cement Quebec as one of their partners on their website. L065 rarely makes it into Boston before 11 p.m. Usually the dispatcher has them follow a Keolis inbound into town. This is a historically significant location to L065 because up until mid-2018, it would switch off of the Lowell line right here onto a remaining track from Boston and Maine Yard 8. This track was taken out and replaced by the Green Line extension. Just 50 years ago, freight trains were a very common thing in Boston. This photo was taken by Alan McMillan at the current location of East Somerville Station, which shows Yard 8 in action. The only remaining evidence of Yard 8 is the old light tower that still remains on the Lowell line's wayside. "100 miles and 9 hours later, the sand train has arrived in Boston.
5, 10 to go.
L065 will now shove its loads up Track 2 of Tower A interlocking. The sand train has major significance to Boston freight rail history. This is the last road freight left in Boston, if you can even call it that. L065 and L055 are what truly remains of Boston's once robust freight rail network. If you're interested in learning more about Boston's freight rail history, check out this video in the top right. I also have more content coming on this topic in the future. L065 unhooks from their loads and pulls back into Tower A. This is so that they can reposition the locomotives onto the other side of the consist. This scene shows the last men standing side by side, the final two freight trains that serve a smaller but functioning industrial area. From here, L065 runs up to FX interlocking under I-93 in Somerville. This footage, taken in June 2025, shows some of their switching operation. They now get permission to reverse directions and head back into the Boston Sand and Gravel yard. With no more passenger traffic to worry about for a couple of hours, L065 can use the main line as headroom for their switching operation. Made evident by I-93's viaduct looming above us, the location of Boston Sand and Gravel is quite advantageous. L065 now shoves the empties into another yard track. This operation will continue for a few more hours, until the crew is ready to head back up to Dover. Meanwhile, L055 with the Cement Quebec hoppers should just be arriving at the Everett Industry. Once these hoppers are dropped off, they will be switched around by the Cement Quebec Alco switcher and be siphoned of their cement. This cement will be loaded into trucks that distribute the hot commodity throughout the city. Please keep in mind that this portion of the video is based on my outside observation of this industry's operations. The morning starts early. A front loader latches on to some of the loaded sand cars, using a hydraulic coupler on its front end. The loader then acts as a locomotive would. The operator notches up the vehicle and pulls the cars into the unloading area. That device looming above the train cars is known as a shaker. A shaker is only needed when sand will not readily flow out of the car by gravity. A situation where this may occur is when pockets of sand freeze in the winter. Each of these cars is around 145 tons. The front loader can only handle so many loaded cars at a time.
Well, restricting mainline 3 arriving.
The use of a front loader allows for Boston Sand and Gravel to save money by not having to invest in a singular railroad engine for this relatively small operation. Also, given the layout of these tracks, it is advantageous to have a vehicle that is not bound to a right-of-way, that can circle around a consist by simply driving on a gravel road. The front loader continues these operations until all cars have been unloaded. This operation can sometimes take multiple days, depending on how many cars need to be dealt with. It appears that sand is sent out of the bottom of the train car and into the ground. From here, it is sent on a conveyor belt to either the bulk aggregate bins or the batch plant inside the building. At the same time, a front-end loader driver is responsible for moving bucket loads of sand from the bulk aggregate bins to the aggregate bins controlled by the dispatcher. When the dispatcher needs an aggregate to go onto the conveyor belt heading up to the building, they choose the bin with said aggregate, and it is vibrated out using a vibrator feeder. Meanwhile, this driver must make sure that each aggregate bin is constantly being refilled with more aggregate. Meanwhile, in the main building, the recently extracted aggregate from the aggregate bins may be sent to a batch plant where it is mixed with the ingredients to make concrete. Keep in mind, Boston Sand and Gravel doesn't just make concrete. They distribute the raw aggregate materials too, like sand and gravel. Aggregates from these areas are loaded into trucks that carry the raw materials to other job sites around the city. I also noticed that these bins appear to hold a surplus of aggregates, likely for long-term storage. It would make sense for Boston Sand and Gravel to have more than they need. This allows for the site to continue the production of concrete even during times when the sand and gravel may not be able to make it into the city for days at a time. Excess sand can be seen all around this area, often surrounding the concrete pillars of the Leverett Connector, which the company provided concrete for many years ago. Located 3/4 of a mile northwest of the main site is a smaller Boston Sand and Gravel building. Here, concrete mixers are maintained and stored. When morning comes, the concrete mixers are quickly dispatched out of this yard and sent down an access road to the industry. The road weaves the mixers through the pillars of the Zakim Bridge, and behind the main building, they loop around and pull into the concrete loading area. Back inside the building, concrete is being made by mixing sand from Ossipee, gravel from Hooksett, cement from Cement Quebec, and water. Down below, the concrete mixers are eagerly awaiting being loaded by the dispatcher. The dispatcher is responsible for loading mixers with the exact order of concrete requested by customers. When instructed, the mixers pull forward in the loading area and are filled with materials by way of this black tube. After all of this hard work, the concrete is finally ready to make it to its final destination. Today, this mixer is being sent to a project by Assembly Square in Somerville. On the way to the construction site, the mixer must keep its concrete drums spinning. The trucks also are able to add more water into the tank. This ensures the concrete won't begin hardening en route to the destination. Drivers also only have about 90 minutes from loading to unloading before hardening may occur. Proximity to the job site is imperative in the concrete business. Given its location in the heart of the city, it's no wonder why Boston Sand and Gravel has been so long-lasting and successful. Our concrete mixer has now arrived at the job site, Draw 7 State Park. The Draw 7 State Park renovation is a project aiming to redesign the layout of the park. At this point, the former grassy field has been dug up. It appears that today Boston Sand and Gravel is providing concrete for the foundation of what will be the Overlook Plaza. Our concrete mixer is beginning to pour its concrete into this truck-mounted concrete pump. Trucks like these take in concrete from mixers and use a tube to pour the concrete precisely where it needs to go. Once all the concrete has been poured, the mixer leaves the site. The mixer returns to Boston Sand and Gravel via a different route that takes it behind Bunker Hill Community College. This road leads the trucks back into the industry to be washed out and cleaned with water. It is impossible to pour every inch of concrete out of a mixer, so the excess must be washed out of the truck before it hardens. After being cleaned, the concrete mixer follows dispatcher instructions and either ends its day or heads back in line to be refilled with fresh material.
Chris, how long before you clear of Wilmington? Let them know I got a switch failure in shop. I need to clear these guys up.
Work at the industry begins winding down in the afternoon, when most construction sites are closing. At this time, a special truck filled with water sprays the roads to maintain dust control. This happens periodically throughout the day. Some cement mixers are still being sent out to construction sites, while some are returning back to the industry to get washed and put away at the yard just up the road. This is how it appears to go most weekdays here at Boston Sand and Gravel. This cycle repeats itself for days upon days, building the city you know and love, hiding in plain sight. Boston Sand and Gravel is more than just a Fisher-Price style model of a what was Boston, in which this factory's tower was one of the largest things one could see along the city's horizon. It is an industry, busy day and night, with a special train that keeps it active. It is an anchor of the city. Its concrete supports the high-rises of Boston, and its productivity keeps the site securely in place. It represents the grit we Bostonians love to exude. It's like Virginia Lee Burton beautifully illustrated in her book, The Little House. As the little house remained the same, the city grew around it. The little house, which once blended into a neighborhood of similar-looking buildings, later stuck out in the crowd as the last one standing. Boston Sand and Gravel has a very similar story. It holds itself strong in its place, and in the hearts of many longtime Bostonians. To many of us, it means nothing. A building entangled by highways and condos. But to some of us, Boston Sand and Gravel is a landmark, and to each and every one of us, it is a foundation. So the next time you find yourself going down I-93, take a look off to your right. Learn to appreciate what Boston Sand and Gravel has brought to this city, and hopefully learn to love this Boston relic hidden in plain sight. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this series. My interest in Boston Sand and Gravel begun when I was a kid, going on road trips with my family up to Cape Ann. The structure always caught my eye, and naturally, so did the rail cars underneath it. To me, Boston Sand and Gravel is the ultimate Boston landmark because It is the reason for much of the landmarks in Boston. Not only that, but it is also one of the few things that has remained a constant in a changing Boston landscape. And that is a comforting thing. I can rest assured that each trip I take around the Leverett Connector, I will go by good old Boston sand, and hopefully that will never change. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to my channel and sharing this video with people who you think would be interested in this Bostonian story. Also, in big channel news, I have just launched a merch store. I am selling Boston by Rails themed hats, t-shirts, stickers, and even more. Take a look at what there is to purchase on my channel homepage. We would love to see you sporting some of this merchandise out on the rails. Anyways, thanks to each and every one of you for 10,000 subscribers. So until next time, I will see you all again soon, out there on the rails.
Recording, ready? 1,